Hello again, everyone. This is Steve Callis in our continuing effort for the Power Memorial Academy Alumni Association to interview as many Power Memorial Hall of Famers as we possibly can. Today we have a very special guest. Len Elmore is a two-time Power Memorial Hall of Fame inductee, once individually, of course, and once as part of the 1970 varsity basketball team that went undefeated, won the city championship, was viewed to be the #1 team in the nation, and some people, including me, feel one of the greatest high school basketball teams of all time. So we're going to bring Len in right now. And Len, welcome to doing this. We're so happy you can do it. But I just want to start out with, where did you grow up and how did you wind up going to Power Memorial?
Well, Steve, it's good to be with you. I grew up in the beginning, obviously. I was born and raised in Bed-Stuy. Then we moved to East New York to public housing. My parents ultimately both got city jobs, and we were able to move from public housing to a small little hamlet in Queens, Springfield Gardens, South Jamaica, depending on what map you look at. But that's kind of where I got started with regard to playing serious sports. I mean, I played baseball for a period of time, but ultimately got a little too tall, even though I love the game. And I'm goofing around in my junior high school, which actually was in Woodside because of free transfer during that period of time to integrate the schools in New York City. And it was a public school. And I had a substitute PE teacher see me playing around at the basketball hoop with some of my friends. I had really no idea. I watched a little basketball on TV, but had no real idea of how to play the game. And, I consider myself akin to Chief in Cuckoo's Nest. That's how I looked playing the game. But he saw some athleticism in me, knew I would grow to be a lot taller than the 6'4" I think I was in the ninth grade. And so he asked me, played on my insecurity and said, "Don't you want to play a sport where people are close to your size?" And of course I said, "Sure, why not?" So he arranges to take me to this high school, a parochial school on 61st in Amsterdam. I go in and a bunch of guys are out there on the court ready to play. We're around the center jump. They toss the ball up, they tip it, and everybody takes off. And I'm still standing at half court. And I said, "How do you guys know which way to run?" Because I had no idea of the rules. But ultimately, that summer, I tried to, immerse myself in basketball, played a lot of half court, accepted the opportunity to go to Power. And, the first day, shy as I was, I kind of walked up to the school, and everybody remembers, the area where we'd walk up the steps before getting in, and that whole gathering area. And I just stood there because I didn't know where to go, what to do. And of course, one of my teammates, who ultimately would be my teammate, Jap Trimble, walks up to me and kind of takes me by the hand and shows me the ropes. So that's essentially how I got to Power. My sophomore year was pretty much a learning experience on how to play basketball. I tried to utilize the athletic skills that I had to play defense and rebound and really, start to study offense. Although I had a couple of guys on my team who, carried the day offensively, both Jap Trimble and Ed Searcy. But, that's how I kind of got started. My parents recognized I'd have to pay some money with regard to tuition, even though I was, kind of partially on scholarship. But, for them, getting a parochial school education, particularly Catholic education, was extremely important, and obviously it paid off.
So tell us about Power, not just the basketball prowess, you guys did great, but also, influences, teachers, friends, whatever. But tell us about Power back then. This is the late 60s up to 1970 when you graduated, both on the court and off the court.
Well, I mean, obviously, being at an all-male school, that was my first experience doing that, having gone to public school up until then in co-ed. But it was important because it maintained focus to a great extent. You develop, some really good and close friendships during that period of time. My issue was living as far as I did in South Queens. It took me about an hour and 20 minutes to get to school and to get home every single day, which it became, kind of a habitual excursion for me. There were periods of time when I'd get up and get to the bus to go to the subway to get to Power, to get to Columbus Circle. It would be dark. And then, after practice, I'd get home, it would be dark. There were times when, in the weekends, I was so tired, I'd sleep. They actually built a whole housing, a residential area behind my house. And I didn't really notice it. It took about 6-8 months to do it. And I said, where did that come from? But as you said, educationally, it was a tremendous experience simply because of the discipline and the things that you certainly had to go through. From a standpoint of discipline, keeping your hair reasonably cut, wearing a jacket and tie to school, and those types of things. While today it's not as big a deal, it certainly was important back then. It all came together, recognizing how that would shape you as a man, particularly from, as you said, a self-discipline standpoint. I had plenty of terrific teachers, a lot of fun in class. I remember my French teacher, Mr. McCutcheon, a Scottish brogue, teaching us French. I remember Brother Murphy, I think it was his first year, and I felt so bad for him in his first year. One of our classmates, I think it was Chick Pisani, had a Playboy centerfold rolled up and taped it to the blackboard. And when Brother Murphy came in and touched it, all of a sudden it would unfurl, and everybody got a great laugh. He turned red as a beet. I remember somebody else, it might have been Chick, that and that may be why he was called Chick, let a parakeet go in class. And so we had a lot of fun doing that. Who else was it? Brother Sirignano, our athletic director, very, very sticky with regard to equipment. He was, as athletic director, certainly he had a budget that he had to deal with. And I'll give you a story about that later on. And who else can I talk to? Some of the lay teachers were terrific. Of course, Mr. Cunard, our coach, had a profound impact on me. During games, I could never go home. Once we had a game at home, I would have to stay at school because I could never get home and come back in time to play the evening game. So Mr. Cunard also was in the same position since he lived in New Jersey. So we had an opportunity to speak an awful lot during that period of time. And during the time of a lot of social upheaval, social unrest, riots in Detroit and other places. And, we would talk about those things. And, he would help shape my thinking with regard to, people and, how we get along with people. Ultimately, I actually ran for president of student council, which, I won in my senior year. But a lot of it had to do with, how I approached friendships, how I approached, trying to bring people together, find common ground to progress. I considered myself somewhat of a political radical back in those days. At 16, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it really kind of shaped my thinking. And when I would come to history and other places, I kind of added a little bit of that progressive thought into class. And, we got in some great debates. So, I look back very fondly on my education. There's some friends that, I read about and see how well they've done. There are others that I've been in touch with and some that have passed on. And, the passing parade is something that we all have to deal with at some point in time, but the memories stay with you. And I'm pleased and proud to have gone to the academy.
Let's talk briefly, if we could, about those 2 championship games against Malloy.
Hey.
One was low, one was high. And also a game I remember that Jeff Trimble didn't think was such a big deal when I asked him, that boys high school game in the Garden. And it's interesting, I don't know what your recollection is, but Jeff said, yeah, I don't remember that game being close, but I was at that game, which was before a Nick game. And I went back and looked, you guys were losing 12-1 at the beginning. And, boys high school had Henry Kinsey. I don't know if Mel Davis was on that team or not, but they were the PSAL guys, and you guys were the Catholic high school guys. But just tell me, I know the first year with Joyce and Winters, I was at that game as well. It was very, very disappointing. But then, of course, you got your revenge the next year. What are your memories of those two games?
Well, let me go back with regard to Boys High.
Mhm.
Let me go back to the point. We would scrimmage them in preseason. And the first year, it was my sophomore year. And, Boys High had that reputation, inner city guys that were tough. You forget we're inner city guys too, to a great extent.
Right.
But, and I remember nevertheless going up center jump. And, I go up and I get hit in the mouth by their center, Ron Williams, and my mouth is bleeding. And I'm running up and down the floor saying, this isn't basketball. And they're pushing me out of the way and really looking to intimidate me, which, in some regards I was intimidated. But that was a learning experience. And I took that with me throughout that season. And during the summertime, we would go and we play in the Rucker tournament, where you learn how to not only, exert your strength and, your abilities, but you also learn not to back down. And so that following year, my junior year, we scrimmaged them again. And this time the center jump goes up. Mel Davis is on the team, this guy, Ron Williams. And now I'm the one that dishes it out. And, it was like amazing. I'm blocking shots. I'm just, dominating them because of the learning experience.
Right.
Now, again, Mel Davis, that was my junior year. He had played on the team. He graduated from Boys High. So we played in my senior year on the schedule for real at Madison Square Garden. In fact, we're the first high school game to be played at Madison Square Garden since the riot between, I think, Boys and Wingate back in the days when Roger Brown played for Wingate, and I forget who else, but some famous guys played for Boys High. And they ultimately had a riot, and Madison Square Garden said that, they wouldn't allow high school games to be played there any longer. But we played in this game, and you're right. We started out very slowly. They came out like a house of fire. And, Mr. Cunha just called us into the huddle and said, what do you guys want to do? You want to get embarrassed, or, are you going to go out and play the game the way you're supposed to play? And of course, we went out, and from that point on, I think we thoroughly dominated them. I think we won the game by about 12, 15 points.
Yeah.
And so, that was something that boosted our our confidence. But going back to the Malloy game, our junior year, we had lost one game. It was a game in the Washington, D.C. area to a school, I think Cardinal O'Hara, where they just took the air out of the ball, slowed it down. And, we really weren't experienced enough. And we didn't have the experienced guard play that we necessarily needed to go along with Eddie Japp and myself. And we lost that. It was a close game. Obviously, at the end of the season, the same thing happened. It was a nip and tuck game. KJ, who became one of my teammates in the pro level, we were teammates with the Indiana Pacers. And Brian, who had a terrific game, Brian Winters, he became a teammate also. We were teammates with the Milwaukee Bucks. But, at that time, in the nip and tuck game, we actually had a lead, and suddenly they threw the vaunted Malloy press on us, not having, again, experienced guards. We wound up turning the ball over, and we lost a close game to them. And that was on the Fordham University campus.
Right.
And we made that kind of a challenge, a crucible for us the following year. We never forgot the embarrassment and the heartache of that particular game, and it fueled us in the senior year. And we kind of buzzed through our schedule. And then the first playoff game, we played Fordham Prep. And believe it or not, we're losing. I mean, they took the air out of the ball as well. And we're losing this game. If it wasn't for Steve Donahue, who hit like 2 or 3 long bombs to put us back in the lead, we might have lost that game and, never really gained the adulation and gained the prominence that we did as a team. But Stevie hit those shots. Prior to that whole season, we had played in Pennsylvania and beat my ultimate college teammate, Tom McMillan's team, by about 25. We won up in Buffalo. We beat some of the more prominent New York State teams up there. Washington, D.C. teams like Mackin High School came to us. DeMatha wouldn't play us anymore. I mean, they had their one experience in beating Lou Alcindor's team. They didn't want to roll the dice playing us, so they wouldn't play us. But we beat teams from all over the East, and so ultimately we meet Malloy again. This time, Brian Winters is still there. Kevin Joyce is gone. And we recognize and remember the press. Mr. Cunard actually had us playing against the press, working on it with our now guards, Bobby Toner, Steve Duffy, who are more experienced at playing those particular positions, but also had me helping to break the press by coming and receiving the pass, making decisions to do it. He put 6 and 7 guys on the defense to make the floor look crowded. Which I thought was highly innovative and really helped me be able to pick out open guys and beat that press. Well, when we play Malloy at St. John's, we wound up meeting that same press, the one that beat us the year before, and we beat it with no problem. I think we won that game by about 20-25 and kind of cemented, our team as, the top team in the nation and one of the best teams ever.
So I'm sure when you were a junior and a senior, you were highly recruited for college basketball. I actually spoke to my coach, Brendan Malone, about that time, and he said, if you want to know how good Jap Trimble, how good Len Elmore was, Lefty Driesell walked into the Power Gymnasium, which to someone like me, I have an understanding of what that means. And he said that's how good they were, that this guy would come to Power, to the gym, to watch you guys. But I assume there was a whole lot of other things going around besides not just Maryland. So tell me how you got to Maryland. Tell us about your career there. I know you had a great career there. But what was it like being highly recruited even back then? I've told people even for D1 baseball that I was recruited for shortly after you. It was wacky back then. I know it's crazier now. But even back then, especially with guys like you, high school All-Americans, tell us what that was like, and then about your career at Maryland. What made you decide to go there?
Well, first of all, I mean, the beauty of going to Power, not only was it great basketball, but academically, I was prepared. I could have gone to any school I wanted to because of grades and because of test scores. So that helped a lot. My junior year, I was getting a lot of letters from, smaller schools, junior colleges, et cetera. Obviously, I hadn't proven myself, but being 6'8", 230, people were going to take a chance. It wasn't until my junior year that, I really started to get the deluge of letters from just about every D1 school. I mean, I was getting letters and calls from UCLA. Of course, I said, I followed them once, I'm not following them again. So, I would never be able to, I didn't live up to the expectations then at Power, and I certainly wasn't going to live up to expectations at UCLA. Plus, I probably would have had to compete against this guy Walton, which that story will be told in a little bit later in this particular meeting. But the letters were and the offers were kind of crazy. I got an offer from a coach at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, that promised me a job with the Howard Hughes Tool Company. They would pay for my law school because I had already kind of intimated that I wanted to be a lawyer. They paid for my law school education. They'd give me a job. I could get paid $10,000 a year while this stuff was in writing, which today, obviously would put a school on probation very quickly, although maybe not. I don't know the way the rules have been interpreted. But it was highly competitive. And, I really wanted to go to St. John's. I developed a strong relationship with Lou Carnesecca. They were only a half hour away from my house in Queens. John Kress, who was his top assistant, he and I got to be close. I'd go up and I'd play with those guys in the summertime. But Carnesecca decided he wanted to coach in the pros and went to coach the New York Nets at the time. We were out on Long Island. And that made an opening for Lefty Driesell in Maryland, George Raveling, who was his top assistant. I had taken visits to places like Boston College. I had gone out west to a couple of schools, even, some smaller schools like Bradley and some others that had good basketball traditions. Schools like Duquesne, Georgetown, a lot of schools, particularly Catholic schools, what I became familiar with, what came a knocking. But, it was something about Coach Drizel, a Dale Carnegie devotee, a guy who wouldn't give up, wouldn't accept no for an answer. And George Raveling. And one of the things that they did, they sent me a letter from one of the coaches every single day. Wow. I would look in the mail and I'd have a letter. One of the other competitors, Duquesne University, Red Manning was the coach there. They'd take us out to dinner. First time I ever went to a Swedish smorgasbord. I can never forget that. And there were others, Digger Phelps, that was coaching at Fordham. He was recruiting us, Columbia, just a ton of places, Princeton. My mother wanted me to go to Princeton. But there was just something about Maryland. I visited the University of Maryland, and one of the things that I said to myself, okay, they're sitting between two major metropolitan areas, Baltimore and Washington, which was good. It was still far enough away from my house, but close enough where I can get home when I wanted to. And going to an all-boys school, one of the things I said, if the first 10 women look good, I might go to the school. Idyllic campus, as I say, what you would really expect of a college campus. And so with all of that, I decided that Maryland would be the school that I would go to. Now, right before I made the decision, Hubie Brown, who was an assistant at Duke, came calling and just begged myself and begged Jap to come down, just visit Duke, just come down and take a look. And Hubie was pretty persuasive. Ironically, I wound up playing for him with the New York Knicks, but at that time he was an assistant. So I go to Duke, and Duke is wonderful, and have a lot of New Yorkers and Eastern, Northeastern folks there. But I started to say to myself, this is 1969, 1970, and we're in North Carolina. And so I'm on campus, and that's great. But what happens when I step off campus? Right. What's my experience going to be? So I ultimately made the decision that I was going to Maryland, and they pulled out all the stops. As a matter of fact, the Final Four was in College Park that year. And so Jap and I, when we signed, and Jap Trimble he was equally as impressed with Maryland. We signed together. And the press conference had everybody around the nation there because they were there for the Final Four. And Lefty knew how to arrange the maximum in exposure. So that's that's really how the choice was made. I one of the experiences that I had, though, being recruited by Jack McGee, the coach at Georgetown at the time, he took me out to dinner. We went to a restaurant at Madison Square Garden. And of course, during that time you experiment. So I looked on the menu and there was something I had never had before, duck à l'orange. And so I ate that. We had a game that night at 8:00. And so, we played a game, and within the first 5-8 minutes of the game, suddenly I feel this tingling in my ears and in my nose, and my chest started to tighten up. And then I started to feel swelling. And the next thing you know, I'm having an anaphylactic reaction.
Oh my goodness.
And, I run off the court because I thought I was literally going to die. I ran downstairs to the locker room and, I couldn't breathe. They called the ambulance. Fortunately, Roosevelt Hospital was like 2 blocks away. I get there, and you'll love this. I'm on the emergency room table, but I'm kind of in a daze. And, they want to inject my heart with epinephrine and some other things to pull me out of it. And they're about to cut off the jersey. And I can hear Brother Siriano say, "No, don't cut the jersey." Let him die, but don't cut the jersey. No, I'm just kidding. But that's how miserly he was with regard to the jerseys and the costs. But anyway, after a week I recovered. But that's something I'll never forget. Still made the decision to go to Maryland, and had a lot of fun. I don't know how much more you want me to go into my career and experiences in Maryland, but
a few things. But I do want to point out at the beginning, because the younger people who watch this just won't know. When you went to college, you couldn't even play as a freshman.
Right.
It's hard for people today to understand. We're not only at times that people go right from high school, but now we're in a perpetual one and done right now in college. But it was the exact opposite when you went to college. And I will point out one of your records in advance, because I know I'd like you to talk about some of those ACC battles with North Carolina State. They were borderline legendary back then. But I do know to this day, you're the only Maryland grad to have 1,000 rebounds. And so you're the only Maryland player to this date to have 1,000 points and 1,000 rebounds. But what I wanted to point out was you did it in 3 years. And a couple of the guys right behind you, I know Buck Williams is fourth, but a couple of the guys right behind you, I think Baxter is one of them, they played 4 years. So it's also interesting. It's kind of like a Pete Maravich syndrome, where Pete Maravich did what he did in 3 years. He couldn't play as a freshman. And I know he was the Mad Bomber, but you know what he did. He's still the all-time leading scorer in 3 years. So I'm always impressed with what you guys were able to do without being able to play as freshmen. And maybe you could even tell me, was that viewed back then? Freshmen couldn't play because you were supposed to get acclimated to college. You played on a freshman team. I think Jap might have even said you guys were undefeated. I don't remember exactly, but you were really good. And it's so totally flipped over, Len, to this day, where it's the exact opposite now. People are looking to get in and get out. I don't want to say education be damned, but hopefully some of those guys go back and get their degree. But tell us about kind of going into college and then the highlights or whatever you want to talk about actually playing at Maryland.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right about the values with regard to education, et cetera. I'm still a firm believer that, we have skewed the whole conversation. And even with the pay for play elements of it, people have hijacked the narrative and call it labor now, that, these guys are out there performing labor and therefore they should be compensated for labor. We never thought about it that way in those days. We were the beneficiaries of a benefactor that, in exchange for us playing the game, comporting ourselves well, staying eligible, and exerting ourselves academically, in exchange for that, we'd get room, board, books, tuition, and a huge opportunity in life. That hasn't changed. It's just, again, the narrative has changed and the values have changed. But going to Maryland as a freshman, was a tremendous transformation for me. Now being on my own, I had some of the difficulties that many young people have. I thought I was there to play basketball, and playing on that freshman team that you mentioned, not only myself and Jap Trimble, but we had some other great players like Tom McMillan, and some other guys. I wound up hurting my knee in one of the first games. First of all, I broke my right foot and missed about 4 weeks of the, I wouldn't call it training camp, but the preseason. Then when I finally am in shape, we go and we're playing Georgetown of all teams, and somebody clips my legs out from under me when I went up to block a shot, and I wrecked my knee. I broke my kneecap and tore the patellar tendon. So I only played 6 games as a freshman. But that team did go on to be undefeated and be one of the more heralded freshman teams in America that year. My grades slipped a little bit simply because I was despondent. I couldn't play, and I thought I was there to play basketball as opposed to get an education. But ultimately matured enough and recognized my purpose there. As a sophomore, it became a different story. We won 27 games. The prior year, the varsity only won 13 games. We won 27 games that year, beat the number 2 team in the nation, North Carolina, at home. Won the NIT because, the ACC was a one-bid conference, and we lost to North Carolina, who was number 2 in the nation at that time. We lost to them in North Carolina at the ACC tournament. And so we couldn't go, they go on. But we win the NIT that year in Madison Square Garden. Going forward, we recognized just how good we were. Our junior year, we're playing as one of the top teams in the nation. Of course, NC State with David Thompson, his sophomore year. We had some legendary battles. I think we lose to them by 1 and by 2, and ultimately in the ACC tournament, we lose to them. I had a broken bone in my foot, so Lefty didn't play me in that final game. In the semifinal game, he played me because that allowed us to qualify to make it to the NCAA tournament, because NC State was on probation for recruiting David Thompson, so they weren't allowed to play in the tournament that year. But he didn't allow me to play in that final game, which we could have won. We lost by 2. Could have won that game. I think I would have made a difference in that game as well. But the prior game to qualify, I did play. Anyway, we played in the in the NCAA tournament, got to the Elite Eight, and kind of gotten beat by Providence College with Marvin Barnes and Ernie DiGregorio. They had a terrific team, went to the Final Four, obviously, by beating us. I played that whole tournament with a broken bone in my foot. And, we just didn't get over the hump, so to speak. Senior year, though, here we are. We're one of the top teams in the nation. Our first game is against UCLA. And talk about that Walton guy again. But Bill and I had a mutual respect for each other. That prior season, the year that we spoke of with Providence going to the Final Four, Walton and UCLA beat Memphis State in the national championship game. Walton was 21 for 22, I believe, or 22 for 23 from the field. Right. Almost perfect. And we knew we were playing on the first game in the following season. So I took the videotape of that game and I watched it all summer. Wow. I knew every move Bill was going to make. And so in that first game, from the opening tip, the first time he received the ball, he turns for a hook shot, I block it. He comes back again with another move, I block that. Matter of fact, I think I blocked the second one so hard, it went out of bounds, kind of flew over Coach Wooden's head. He kind of ducked to get out of the way. Throughout that game, I kind of hounded Bill, and this was played at Pauley Pavilion. Bill shot 8 for 24 that game. He got a ton of rebounds because he never left the paint. But I think I had 18 and 15. The problem is, unfortunately, McMillan and John Lucas, our great guard, didn't necessarily show up with their usual superlative game, and we lose by 1 point at Pauley Pavilion, which kind of set the tone. We go on there and win like 12, 14 games in a row before we meet NC State with Thompson, who always made the difference. We played 2 consecutive years on Super Bowl Sunday. At that time, we had the highest rated college basketball games of the year. We lose to NC State in both of those, I think by 1 or 2 points. It was amazing. The margin between us was never more than 3 points in our losses. But, we had some legendary games. And that senior year, we were ranked in the top 5 throughout the year. They were ranked number 1. It came down to that ACC tournament once again, one bid conference. The number 1 team in the nation, NC State, was playing the number 3 team in the nation, the University of Maryland. And all these games are played in the state of North Carolina. And if anybody can go back and look at the box score, they can see that they shot a ton more free throws than we did. Close game throughout. And ultimately, we had a big lead, but we ran out of gas because we had to play 3 games in a row. They only had to play 2 because they won the regular season. And ultimately, we lost to them in overtime. And the sad part about it, once again, and here we are, the number 3 team in the nation, and we're not going to the NCAA tournament. And the number 1 team did, and they went on to win the national championship. Of course, the absurdity of that forced the NCAA to expand the field the following year. Didn't do me any good, didn't do anybody else on our team any good. We got invited to the NIT that year, but we turned it down because 2 years prior we had won it. We had nothing to prove, and we didn't want to destroy our legacy as a great team. To go to the NIT and have an emotional letdown and lose to a lesser team, we probably wouldn't be remembered the way we are remembered now as one of the best teams ever to play and not win a national championship. So, that's kind of the saga at that particular time. But I guess the silver lining was that we got the NCAA to change based upon, the power that we demonstrated and based upon the absurdity of the fact that the number 3 team in the nation, there were 27 other teams who went to the tournament that weren't as good as we were.
And we should point out back then it was a one big conference for all the conferences. If you didn't win your conference, you couldn't get in.
Well, some of the teams didn't even have tournaments. The ACC was one of the few conferences. It was the grandfather, it was the only one for a long period of time that had a conference tournament at the end. The Pac-8 back then with UCLA, they didn't have a conference. You won the league and you go.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. So now you're looking at a pro career. Interestingly, again, a lot of people don't know back then, you could go to the NBA or you could go to the ABA, which was attracting some big time college players and early superstars. I don't know if it was a straight up money thing, but hopefully you're going to tell us. So you were a first round draft pick of both the NBA and the ABA. What was that like? What was your decision making process? And then you can get right into your career as starting in Indiana with the Pacers.
Well, I mean, I recognized that, we had choices, and the ABA was a little convoluted. I was the first draft pick of a team. I'm not sure, one of the teams in Texas, and they actually traded that pick to the Pacers at the time, which it was fortunate for me, simply because, the Pacers were probably the most solvent team, financially solvent team in the ABA, and there were rumors of an eventual merger. But only the most financially solvent teams in the ABA would go. And, ultimately that was the case in 1976, but we're talking about 1974 right now. And I get drafted by also the Washington Bullets, which is right in the backyard of the University of Maryland. And, the offer that they made was, a 3-year offer, only 2 were guaranteed. And, the money by comparison to what the Pacers offered was, at least probably on an annual basis, only half. Pacers made a big offer, and my lawyer and I had done the homework as far as financial solvency and would the Pacers survive a merger, and we made the determination that yes, they would, and so I got 6 years guaranteed with the Indiana Pacers, and that's important for a number of reasons. But first, my rookie year. The coach, you could tell he wanted, a big 7-footer that was going to, dominate in the middle. The Pacers had won the ABA championship like 3 out of the past 4 years prior to us getting there. And so, when I got there, I'm a smaller center. The rebounding really translated, but offensively, I wasn't the kind of guy that you could throw it in and play against the Artis Gilmores, et cetera, down low on a consistent basis because it was so much bigger and stronger. But, coming off the bench, having me come off the bench, the Pacers weren't as successful. We had a great player in George McGinnis, who was a Hall of Famer. Billy Knight was another rookie who was an outstanding scorer, and a bunch of other guys that were terrific players. But I think once he realized, and it's Bob Leonard, who actually just passed away a couple of days ago, Slick Leonard, who was a legendary coach, once he realized that he needed a rebounder and a shot blocker, and someone who could complement some of the other players, I started to get the nod as a starter, and that was in December. And suddenly our fortunes turned around. I'm not going to say solely because of me, but I think the chemistry was better. And we ultimately get to the playoffs, and my rookie year, we wind up upsetting 2 of the best teams in the ABA, the San Antonio Spurs, as well as the Denver, at that time, I think they were the Denver Rockets, coached by Larry Brown. And in my first playoff game, I scored 30 points and hit the game winner against San Antonio, and that kind of set the tone for us in the playoffs. I had some big offensive games, believe it or not. People, I wasn't, that offensively challenged. But it depended on the teams. But certainly a rebounder, I could do that. My second year as a starter, we make the playoffs again. I averaged almost 15 points and 11 rebounds that season. And really seemingly started to come into my own again as a smaller center who could take the bigger guys outside, hit jump shots, hit the offensive glass, and do a lot of things that, the big guys couldn't do. But again, my third year, where I was expecting big things, that was the year of the merger. That was the year we were going to get to play against NBA teams because we now were in the NBA. The 4 teams that made it were the Pacers, the Denver team, San Antonio, and the New York Nets. So we get there and we're all excited. And in training camp, I'm ready to go, ready to, fulfill my, my potential average coming off a season that averaged 15 and almost 11. And then I popped my knee, the ligaments in my knee.
Wow.
That kind of derailed that opportunity. And in fact, I wasn't able to get back on the floor until like January for about 6 games wearing this huge brace. In fact, it was a Nicholas brace that Joe Namath wore playing football. But that thing was so heavy, so cumbersome, there was no way that I could play without it. And there's no way I could play with it. So I sat out the rest of the season after trying it for 6 games. And then after that, you're considered kind of damaged goods. I came off the bench for the Pacers for several years after that. Had some pretty decent years. Was able to play 70, 75, 80 games. So, I was healthy. But, in the back of coaches' minds, when a guy with a bad knee, he's not going to be good enough. I beg to differ. But, 1 year, I think it was my 5th year with the Pacers, I tore up the ligaments in my thumb during practice. I missed most of that season. They ultimately traded me to the Kansas City Kings, who, helped get to the playoffs for the remainder of that year. And then I became a free agent and signed with the Milwaukee Bucks, who had a terrific team with Bob Lanier at the center. Brian Winters that I mentioned, Marcus Johnson, who was an outstanding player, the Hall of Famer, Sidney Moncrief, another Hall of Famer. Just a terrific team. We won 60 games that year. I came off the bench to back up at the power forward spot as well as at the center spot. But once again, didn't get to the championship level. That team lost to the 76ers with Julius Erving and, a lot of great players on that team. The following year, I got traded once again, a youth movement with Milwaukee. I'm in my 8th year now. I get traded to the New Jersey Nets. And because the Nets were sorely in need of a center, because their young center, Mike Jaminski from Duke, hadn't recovered well. They had no one else. So they brought this old grizzled veteran, myself. And we had a team that was mixed veterans as well as some new players. They had a lot of rookies on that team, a lot of ACC flavor, guys from North Carolina, et cetera. But, the mixture of older guys and 2 guys from Maryland, started to play well. Larry Brown was the coach, and I would say that Larry Brown was probably the best pro coach I ever played for a number of reasons. The way he handled young players, the way he handled practice and other players. He never put you in a position that you weren't accustomed to through practice. But our starting front line that season was myself from Maryland, Albert King from Maryland, and Buck Williams from Maryland. And so it was wonderful every game. I played 80 games that year. It was wonderful. Every place we went, you had the announcers calling out your name and your school. And I think they got tired of saying, and from the University of Maryland. But we started off slowly as a young team, with a couple of older veterans. We were 2-13, but we wound up winning 44 games that year and made the playoffs because of the maturity and the meshing of talents and young players and their enthusiasm. And that's why I say Larry Brown was a great coach to be able to pull that off. So that was a good year. And the next year, I came off the bench again because they had signed a guy by the name of Darryl Dawkins, thinking that he would be the answer with regard to the big guy in the middle. Yeah. We played well, but it made the playoffs once again, but didn't get past the first or second round. And then I was a free agent again and got enticed by the Knicks to join their team. And that's where Hubie Brown was still coaching. And, I knew I was going to come off the bench. I'm in my 10th year and I'm getting sore, getting older. And, it was a good experience to play for the Knicks, to, play for a winning team and get to the playoffs. But, once again, not fulfilled enough to be able to go on to any kind of championship or anything like that. And that's when I decided, with the pain I was undergoing with bad knees and the age, and quite honestly, I got a little bored. I decided to kind of move on to another territory. I had taken that summer, I had taken the LSAT and did reasonably well, applied to some law schools, got accepted by a number of them. Never did apply to Harvard Law. I was challenged by my girlfriend, who is now my wife, asked me, was I afraid? And, of course I had to show her So I applied and got accepted. The irony was I got accepted when we were playing the Boston Celtics. And so I decided, okay, I had another year left on my contract. What was I going to do? So on an off day during the playoffs, I take the T, which is the mass transit in Boston, over to Cambridge, and looked around, went into the library, walked around the campus, and finally made a decision. You know what? This is where I'll be next year. So I kind of had to forego that final year with the Knicks and decided to enroll in law school.
That's a fantastic basketball career story, but it opened up so many other things. Now you get into Harvard, you go to Harvard Law School. You can talk about that if you'd like. You graduate from Harvard, and then the things you've done after that are just, to me anyway, incredible. So wherever you want to go, tell us a little about going to Harvard Law School in the mid 80s, I guess, and then what that led you to after getting out of Harvard Law School. I know you were a prosecutor in Brooklyn for a while, which must have been an interesting experience, but just tell us about law school and after that, wherever you want to go with it.
Well, I mean, it was an interesting experience. When I got to Harvard Law, obviously I was kind of amazed that I was there, but I certainly felt that I belonged. And having 10 years of experience, being out of school for 10 years, I recognized that what I may have lacked in the so-called philosophical habits that I had to recover. I remember old Cardinal Newman, the philosophical habits, we were taught that at Power. I could make up with life experience. And so the combination of those two helped me tremendously. I mean, I had a terrific experience at law school. I was able to work as an attorney for indigent clients, representing tenants against landlords. I was an investigator for the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, which was against employment and housing discrimination. Ultimately worked for the public defender in Boston, and had some terrific experiences in helping people. But the move from being a public defender to ultimately becoming a prosecutor was interesting. I remember we were allowed to conduct what they call preliminary hearings, which were in lieu of a grand jury presentation. And so the preliminary hearing was to determine whether or not there was enough evidence against the defendant to bind them over. And so we're representing a guy who was accused of aggravated rape, which included violence. And, we had to put the victim on the stand and really knock down her story so that the appropriate charges were made. And I felt terrible in doing so, but I was successful. And they wound up knocking the charges down. And at that time, I was despondent. How could I do that to this person? And my supervisor said, look, if you were on the other side, if you were the prosecutor, you probably would have charged correctly. And we wouldn't have to go through this, and the victim wouldn't have to go through this. And so in my mind, I said, you know what? Maybe I need to be on the other side. Defense attorneys are reactive. Prosecutors can be proactive. If you're the right of the right timber as far as a prosecutor is concerned, where you're focused on doing justice rather than merely convicting. And so throughout that year, I gave it some strong thought. And when I did my third year paper, which was a prerequisite to graduation, I did it on peremptory challenges. I mean, most people out there know that those are challenges that are made without a reason. And my argument was that the prosecution shouldn't have any. And it was a Supreme Court case, Batson versus Kentucky. And in doing that, I came across the fact that only one prosecutor in America filed an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief, in favor of Batson. Only one. And that was Elizabeth Holtzman, the district attorney in Kings County, and said, you know what? If that's the case, I could work for her. That's my home borough. And, it's something that, I could fulfill, that public interest desire in me, but to do the right thing. And so ultimately I got the job with them, prosecuted misdemeanors, felony cases. Ultimately, I wound up prosecuting police misconduct, which I'm sad to say, so many of the issues that occurred back then are in occurrence today. So many of the bad actors were the wellspring of many of the bad actors today in law enforcement. And so that was my job. I look at so many of these cases now that we're talking about, the Chauvin case and some of the others, and realize that, things haven't changed. And that's the sad part about it. Hard to get convictions even back then, because even though the evidence was, airtight, just juries and even judges were loath to convict, because oftentimes the victim had a record. The victim had something that, allowed people to make an excuse, and I'm not going to ruin this police officer's career on the basis of this person, which was wrongheaded and the absolutely the wrong way to view it. But nevertheless, I mean, we see that happening today. So, that was the beginning of my career. But, after 4.5 years of that, and the amount of money that you made as a civil servant, my wife and I got married, living in Manhattan. It was hard to begin to raise a family on, at least for us, on that salary. And I had used my savings as a player to pay for my legal education, which was pretty expensive, and some of the other things. But ultimately, wound up moving on from that to a private practice to a certain extent. I was a legal consultant for a couple of corporations, and then obviously discovered the opportunity to become a sportscaster, to work for the local or the regional network, the Jefferson Pilot, Raycom Sports, to do ACC games, and moved on to work for CBS, ultimately ESPN, et cetera. Got to do some terrific college basketball games and even NBA games. My voice is heard on the Michael Jordan documentary, when you talk about the Jordan rules, which were developed by Brendan Malone. There's a lot of 6 degrees of power folks in all of this. But that's kind of where I was at that point. As a broadcaster as well as a lawyer in private practice. Went on to do some other things. I started my own sports management company where I represented athletes, and we represented in 4.5 years 7 first-round picks in the NBA, several high draft picks in the NFL, several Olympic gold medalists. But the business, particularly in basketball, which was the bread and butter, it got so dirty because of the increase in money and salaries, and other agents in competition were willing to do anything, bribe kids and their families with money to get them to be their clients. Ultimately, I said, I developed a reputation. I have this license. I can't stoop to conquer and risk all of that to remain competitive. So after, as I said, 4.5, almost 5 years, I decided to get out of that business, went back to the practice of law, ran a couple of small companies, an education technology company that used to do SAT and other standardized test prep online, which kind of leveled out the opportunity. We know that as many of those tests, success is based on economics, on family wealth, and so many underrepresented communities did not have the opportunity to go to Princeton Review or Stanley Kaplan to prep for those tests. So we offered something that made it, at least more equitable, if you will. And that's when the states were really focused on No Child Left Behind and these state standardized tests. And so I did that for a while. Also, again, continued to practice law, continued to work in sports, work for ESPN, CBS, and others. And then I was asked by the NBA and the NCAA in a joint venture to run their youth basketball initiative called iHoops, which was, again, to try to look at the problems that were associated with high school basketball and AAU basketball, and that were brought into college and ultimately the pros, and try to fix it from there, which I think we started to do a pretty good job. But Dr. Miles Brand, the president of the NCAA, whose idea this was, he passed away. And it wasn't nearly the primary focus of the NBA. And ultimately, iHoops kind of died down, got folded into USA Basketball, because the NBA was really interested in controlling the top 100 high school players in many ways. And that wasn't my focus. So, I kind of parted ways with it. iHoops ultimately died after I left. So, went back to the practice of law and working in TV for a period of time, and got involved in college sports reform with the Knight Commission. Right now, I am one of the co-chairs of the Knight Commission. If anybody's interested, knightcommission.org. We offer, some transformative ideas on how we can make college better, not necessarily a minor league for the pro sports, but make it better in order to the benefit the health, education, and well-being of the college athletes. So, that's kind of traversing my career. I mean, anything specific you want to ask, I'm more than happy to.
I should ask right up front, Knight Commission, KNIGHT
Correct.
commission.org.
Yes, sir.
Okay, just to make sure people know. No, I mean, it sounds like an incredible life to me. You've always kept that high integrity, which I always respected you for going back to high school. I actually remember being in the high school gym, or the auditorium, which was the high school gym. And I think my recollection is they gave you, like, I think a jacket for being an academic All-American or something at the time. And again, those things are impressive. I agree with you totally, because Power academically prepared me well for NYU. And then I went to Fordham Law and never felt, out of place or overwhelmed by the other kids or what they had. And that was the beauty of Power to me, because it was incredible athletics, as we know, but it was also very good academically and prepared you and me and, thousands of others for college. But I would like to know, so you played for the Nets and the Knicks, which maybe because they were in New Jersey, it wasn't a gigantic thing then, but now it would be. It would be almost like playing for the Mets and the Yankees, or heaven forbid, if you're a hockey fan, the Rangers and the Islanders, which would not be cool. But to go from those experiences into becoming a prosecutor, into becoming to all the other things you did, I totally agree with you. I know a little bit about the sports agent world. And I even think I spoke to you at the time when we did a radio show on Rick Wolf's radio show. I was subbing for him, and you told me how bad it was behind the scenes. But it always seemed like you could come out of that and go to something bigger and better in terms of helping kids, and not just basketball, but, academically, athletically. I do kind of like your take. I don't know if you want to go into this at all. The students today, it's totally flipped now. They all want to be one and done. Well, not all of them. The best players want to be one and done. We go to Kentucky because at least for the last 10 years or so, that's kind of been your way to the NBA quickly. And I don't know if you see now a seismic shift from when you were a freshman and couldn't even play on the varsity to now today, where everybody's looking to get in if they're good enough to play that first year and then go. And we also have this new G League thing. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or the offshoot where you could play and get real money now coming out of high school. It seems to me we've kind of missed. I'm totally in agreement with you. I had a full scholarship to play baseball in college, and it was what you said: free room, free board, free tuition, free books. They even gave me a nice job opening up the gym 3 days a week, for like $4 an hour at the time, which was like real money. But to me, it's totally kind of flipped now. And I understand the money in pros is so incredible now. It wasn't like that when you certainly went into the pros. But nowadays, it's life-changing from the get-go for a lot of people. So maybe that's why it shifted. But the whole notion of going to Maryland for an education as well as playing basketball or fill in the blank college is almost out the window, except maybe you'll tell me in some mid-majors where guys go and stay 4 years because they want to get, an education as well as a basketball career. But that bigger picture thing strikes me as something that has changed drastically, I'll say in the last, you'll tell me better, 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, look, it really comes down to money. It comes down, as you mentioned, life-altering opportunities. The problem is, particularly in basketball, it's only going to happen for less than 2% of those who play the game. But everyone has a dream, and who am I or anyone else to try to dismantle that dream? The problem is, let's bring those dreams into reality. You give it your best shot. Look, I had an opportunity to go to Maryland. I had an opportunity to go to any school I wanted to. My mother wanted me to go to Princeton.
Right.
You know, to this day, Pete Carrill thinks the reason I didn't go to Princeton was because when he brought an assistant coach into our house and he was there and making a presentation to the family, the assistant coach sat the wrong way on my mother's antique couch and broke the leg. And, you know, that put an end to the couch. And Coach Carrill to this day says, oh, I lost that opportunity.
That's why.
But I went to Maryland because of the exposure. You know, I thought I could get a good education, but also the game of the week, the ACC game of the week was on television in New York.
Right.
Because of the guys, Kevin Joyce and John Roach and, you know, Tommy Owens, those guys going down to South Carolina and other New Yorkers, you know, Charlie Davis at Wake Forest, Charlie Scott at North Carolina. So many New Yorkers went down that they would put the games on in New York.
Right.
And so with that exposure, you know, I thought, you know, that'd be great because I had a dream. Ultimately, it wasn't until my sophomore year I realized I could be a pro, but I had a dream too of being celebrated. And that's what we have today. And now with social media platforms and others, the idea of being a celebrity is equally as important to many of these young people as money. And the money element of it drives the decisions in so many cases of the parents as well, who, you know, are looking for something that's life-changing. And so I get it, but you also have to put it in perspective that, you know, out of every 100, only 2 are going to get the opportunity, or maybe 1.5 are going to get truly the opportunity. And so what are the rest, the other 98 are going to do out of every 100? And that's where the opportunity to get an education, that's when the distance from reality sets in, where people don't think they need an education. I'm just coming here to ball and I'm going to get recognized and I'm good enough. I can't tell you how many times I go and I talk to college students, college basketball players, and I ask them, how many of you think you're going to be pros? Every single one of them raises their hand. And even, you know, and that to me is a signal of something, going wrong here. And then you add in that colleges have been exploited. There's no question about it that, you know, from the standpoint of providing a quality education, you know, young people have been prevented in many ways of doing many of the things that I wanted to do. I was an advocate for my education. If I had a test or I needed to study, I'd tell my coach. And, you know, maybe I was in a position where I could leverage my talent and to be able to say that and the coach wouldn't bother me as opposed to others. But you have to give them an opportunity to be advocates for their education, knowing that, you know, it could end tomorrow with an injury. And I recognize that. I faced that crossroads several times. But the idea that not taking advantage of what's out there, you know, it really bothers me. I've heard parents say that college basketball is like slavery. And I just shake my head. Are you kidding me? You know, there was a time when actual slaves existed in America. And if you taught them how to read, you could be hung. You know, that to me is one of the most ridiculous analogies going, but people do it obviously for the sensationalist benefit. The bottom line is opportunity abounds with a college education. You hear too many people saying you don't need one. Yes, you do. Most people do. And those who have the talent to play basketball, that's great. But why not do both? You know, I'm a living example of somebody who was born and raised in public housing,
Yep.
ultimately was able to do both and have success in both. But we don't hear that. So yeah, I'm definitely a proponent for education. I think that the NCAA and, you know, those who control college basketball, college sports in general, have a lot further to go in benefiting college athletes short of paying them like pros, which I think is a huge mistake and ultimately will destroy not only college sports, but certainly will destroy those who play college sports simply because it creates a distraction from the education process. But, you know, I don't necessarily have to go into that. In the end, you know, I use my experience as long ago as it was. There are so many things that haven't changed. And I use that experience to say that you can experience both. You know, I didn't get paid $40 million a year. sadly to say, like some of these players do. I didn't even get paid $9 million a year like guys who were on the end of the bench get paid. So, I didn't have life-changing money, but nevertheless been able to make a living and do very well and be very comfortable. And I base it on the education that I received, beginning with Power, going through college and even in the professional school. So, that's something I think that continues to be lost because the narrative has been hijacked and it still becomes all about money and nothing else. As I said, the NCAA and others can do better, can be more equitable in how they utilize their resources. Coaches, they're, as good as the coaches are, there's no coach in America worth $10 million a year. I'm sorry. If your values are skewed correctly, there's no reason a coach should be the highest paid state employee when, student athletes are lacking in certain things. As far as their education, their health, their safety, and their well-being. That should not be the case. So, but, as I said, those experiences have taught me a great deal, and that's why I stay involved right now to make sure that, college athletes are treated with the ultimate, not only respect, but given the ultimate resources necessary for them to succeed, again, short of paying them salaries to play.
Well, Len, this has been a wonderful interview. I don't know if you have anything other big picture to say or anything about, how Power puts you on the right course. And of course, I'm sure your family as well. But any final thoughts, or those were great just as you left it right then, because it's kind of the bigger picture thing that I was glad that you got into.
Yeah, I mean, as we say, we learn our values and we develop our values in adolescence and, in high school. And certainly, I developed some. Have I been an absolute saint? No, but the recognition of, my shortcomings and the ability to overcome them. I've been blessed with a beautiful family with, the opportunities, not only for myself and my wife, who's been terrific, but also my sons. I have a Princeton graduate with a master's degree in sports management. I've got a Columbia graduate who has a Columbia MBA. I mean, and they were athletes in high school as well, but our focus was not for them to become pros. Our focus was for them to become the best that they can be in whatever walk of life that they choose. And hopefully, as they move on and get married and have children, that'll be the same thing. That's the legacy that we want to leave. And again, much of that begins with what I learned and the people with whom I associated all the way through from high school up until now. And it's been, it's been a fun ride. I just turned 69 years old. Hard to believe that. But, now those are the times when we start to look back on what we've done, what we've left. And hopefully, if there comes a remembrance at some point in time, that people can say about me that I left the world in a better place than it was when I first got here.
Yeah. Our thanks to Len Elmore. This is Steve Callis for the Powell Memorial Alumni Association. We'll see you the next time.